You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 4th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, the Trump tariffs kick in. We'll ask what this means for US trade with China, Canada and Mexico. We'll find out how they'll work and where they'll hurt. Also coming up,
I think it is very, very important that we avoid the risk that the West divides. And I think on this, UK and Italy can play an important role in bridge building, let's say.
But can the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni be the one to close the gap between Europe and the US? We'll hear the latest from Paris Fashion Week, go through the papers, and I'll be joined by Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs for a culture roundup. Good morning, Sophie. What have you got for us?
I'll be looking at the legacy of painter Jack Vettriano, Art Basel's new awards, and what's in store at Spain's biggest contemporary art fair.
Thanks so much for that. All that and more to come on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. The United States has paused military aid to Ukraine. Critics say Ukraine is no longer being treated by Washington as a victim, but as the aggressor. Arab leaders are holding an emergency meeting in Cairo to examine the rebuilding of Gaza. And the Vatican says Pope Francis had 2 more breathing attacks yesterday and has been put back on an oxygen mask. He's being treated in hospital for double pneumonia. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories, but the deadline has passed for sweeping tariffs of 25% to be imposed on goods entering the US from Mexico and Canada. Newspapers in the US have been suggesting goods to stockpile, such as avocado and maple syrup. The Canadian press has been consumed, covering every possible effect and impact of the tariffs coming into force. There are also further tariffs being imposed on Chinese imports of 10%. And then in the last few hours, China has responded with tariffs of its own against the US. Well, to explain all, I'm joined now by Natasha Linstead, Professor of Government at the University of Essex. Good morning, Natasha.
Good morning.
So the deadline passed, the Trump tariffs have now been imposed. How does this thing work?
Oh, well, this is just going to be a huge tax on the American consumer. And it's actually worse than a tax because the way that global supply chains work, there are a lot of components that are imported and they have to often cross borders. And so for the US, Mexico and Canada, often of a finished good like an automobile would cross borders multiple times before finally reaching the consumer. Every time it passes, it's going to have to face a huge tax. So I would see that the automotive industry in the US is really going to take a huge hit. The U.S. imports a lot of steel from Canada, for example, so it's just going to make everything a lot more expensive. And as you mentioned, China has already declared that they're going to import or employ 15% tariffs on U.S. food imports like chicken, wheat, corn, cotton. That's going to hurt America's agricultural industry. We don't know yet exactly what Canada and Mexico are going to do, but these countries have already becoming incredibly nationalistic in response, understandably so, and they're coming together to find a way to fight back against it.
Indeed, because when we look at what the Canadians and Mexicans have been accused of by Donald Trump, which has enabled or allowed to encouraged him to impose these tariffs. I mean, for Canada, one of the accusations was that they have a terrible problem with the border crossing of migrants and also the smuggling of fentanyl, both of which are comparatively small amounts. And the Canadians employed a fentanyl czar as soon as this thing started to brew.
I mean, the attack on Canada is just completely nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. The U.S. Customs in 2024 seized about 19 kilograms of fentanyl at the border, where there was about 9,600 kilograms at the Mexican border. The other thing is that we're actually seeing a huge amount of Americans fleeing to Canada. So, I mean, it's creating a reverse problem. It is completely insane what has happened, especially because in 2018, Donald Trump himself negotiated a new trade agreement. He didn't like NAFTA, and he called that agreement the best agreement ever, and that included Canada, the US, and Mexico. So it's not clear at all why he is reneging on this.
And we now also have stocks falling as well. I mean, yesterday, in anticipation of these tariffs coming into effect, we had the Dow down by 1.48%. Standard & Poor's was down, Nasdaq was down, and also, if, as you mentioned, when it comes to car manufacturers, General Motors was down 4%. Ford was also down as well. This has already started to hit everybody, not just America and Canada.
Oh, exactly. I mean, this is because about a third of the products into the U.S. Come from Canada, Mexico, and China. It supports tens of millions of jobs. So we see there's a lot of economic uncertainty. As you mentioned, the stocks fell sharply. There's real concerns that this is going to threaten U.S. economic growth. It's going to reignite inflation. And whenever there's economic uncertainty, that's really bad for investment. It's also taking a hit to consumer purchasing power. Consumer confidence is dropping. So it could plunge the U.S. into a recession for absolutely no reason when the U.S. is recovering well. The economy was actually doing really well, but it's going to definitely make things more expensive. And because plants might have to close down in the U.S., it's going to lead to rising levels of unemployment too.
We've seen the Chinese counteract with tariffs in the last couple of hours. But what can Canada and Mexico do?
So they can retaliate with tariffs. I mean, it's going to on U.S. goods coming in, and it will affect their economies. And it's possible that their economies, because their economies are smaller, will be hit harder by that. And I think that's what they're considering doing, because they had tried to appease Trump by strengthening security at the border, because this trade war out of nowhere is so it's so insane, because the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, our economies are completely complementary. We don't compete against one another. We actually work together, and there's really complementary goods that come back and forth that actually support jobs and manufacturing and so forth. So they'll probably try to retaliate, but all of this isn't good for anybody. It isn't good for Canada, and Mexico, or the U.S.
Well, let's bring in Isabel Hilton, founder of China Dialogue and a visiting professor at King's College London's Lau Institute. Good morning, Isabel.
Good morning, Emma.
So we saw the Trump tariffs being imposed about 6 hours ago. We now have the Chinese retaliating immediately. Natasha has already mentioned this, but could you just flesh out a little bit of the detail for us, please?
Yes, the Chinese have chosen, in particular, agricultural goods. That includes 10 to 15% tariffs. I think they're picking agriculture because that's a core basis of Trump's support. But it's also added quite a long list of US firms in other sectors, so aviation, defense, and biotech, adding to what is called the unreliable entity list. And that means that those companies are regarded officially, at least, as a threat to national security, and they won't be allowed to import at all into China. And some export controls. We already had some export controls on critical minerals, which are vital for various aspects of the US economy. So this is a more robust response than we had the first time round. But of course, the tariffs are now pretty steep. We've got 100%, as we had before, on EV, but these tariffs come on top of an existing 20% tariff across the board. But China's also signaling that it would like to talk. It's just not really very clear about what more it could do on President Trump's particular complaint, which is about the export of fentanyl to the United States.
Because, Isabel, the Chinese are in a really difficult position here, aren't they? Because they are wary of offering concessions. They are effectively wary of looking weak. Because, I mean, we've seen what's happened in Ukraine and with Volodymyr Zelensky and his attempts to either put up a resistance to Donald Trump or indeed not to appear weak, that has done him absolutely no favours whatsoever. But what is a strong path for the Chinese to take?
Well, it is. You're right. It's difficult. It's also a particularly difficult moment because every March there are two enormous political meetings in China which set the tone for the year. They actually literally set the plan for the year, and those started yesterday. So it's not the greatest moment to be involved in a very public dispute with the United States, because this is the moment when the Chinese government displays to its people that it is in control and that everything's going frightfully well. The reality is that the Chinese economy is sagging, that they have been trying to introduce measures to stimulate both exports and domestic consumption without enormous success. So it's not a great moment. But on the other hand, China can't be seen to give in to the United States at this sensitive political moment, since it does present the United States as the greatest threat to China's continuing rise. That said, I mean, there has been a lot of diplomatic activity as China tries to establish both good connections with the incoming administration, and it's still a relatively new administration. It's done a lot. It hasn't had a lot of time to talk. So a lot of feelers have been going out in Washington as they try to establish who's left in the departments that they used to talk to and who might be able to have a sensible conversation. As I said, what Trump's complaint, his excuse for these tariffs, apart from a general dislike of China, is that China has done, as he would put it, nothing to curb the export of fentanyl. Now, the fact is, China has talked to the United States about fentanyl. This is a very dangerous opioid, which is indeed killing a lot of Americans. But what China actually exports is largely precursor chemicals for the manufacture of fentanyl, which is then manufactured in Latin America, in Mexico, Colombia, and then exported to the United States or smuggled into the United States. There's a limited amount that China can do about that. And China says, well, we have done what we can. What more would you like us to do? Of course, the United States is hanging tough because this is a key part of Trump's messaging. So we're at the kind of very early moments of exchange of views, to put it no more strongly. And China has signaled, as I say, that it is willing to talk if it could get a clearer idea of what the United States demands are.
Isabel Hilton and Natasha Lindstedt, thank you both so much for joining us on The Globalist. You're with Monocle Radio. Now, this weekend, Keir Starmer positioned himself as a possible bridge between Europe and the White House. But assuaging Donald Trump will take efforts from more than one. So the focus is now turning to Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, possibly the only EU leader who can fit in both at Donald Trump's inauguration and an emergency EU security meeting. Well, I'm joined now from Milan by Monocle's Europe editor-at-large, Ed Stocker. Very good morning to you, Ed.
Good morning, Emma.
Welcome back to Monocle Radio. Let's just look at what's happened in the last few hours. The United States is pausing military aid to Ukraine. I mean, this really ramps up the pressure on Europe, doesn't it?
Exactly. I mean, we can talk about diplomacy. We can talk about all these plans on the table. Meloni was in London on Sunday saying, it's good that everyone chips in with ideas. The more ideas, the better. But at the end of the day, if Donald Trump decides to do what he does, which is sort of steamroll forward and try and bully, if you like, someone into submission, then there's little they can do. What we do know overnight, Europe's been waking up to the news that Trump has decided to pause over $1 billion in aid in arms and ammo to Ukraine, which won't be delivered for now until Zelensky shows more of a willingness to come to the table and negotiate a peace deal with Russia. So that sort of throws up in the air slightly, or the diplomacy that Europe's trying to do to try and have a lasting peace in Ukraine.
We already saw, though, at the weekend, the fact that the Europeans were pulling together. There was, as I mentioned a moment ago, Sir Keir Starmer being one of the principal voices. Yet let's talk about Giorgia Meloni, because she is in this unique position, isn't she, that she can talk and be listened to by both the Europeans and by Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think there's a tactical move on her part as well. But yeah, you're right. Actually, La Repubblica here in Italy described her in quite an interesting way. They said she's off the coast of Europe, but far from Washington. She's trying to play this game, if you like. She's openly quite cynical of some of the decisions that are being floated by European leaders, namely the UK and France. She's cynical of troops being sent to Ukraine, and she really sees a sort of pragmatic side to all of this. She realizes that Europe needs America for a lot of things, for its technical prowess, for its intelligence, and so much more. And so she's trying to play this role, if you like, of bridge. She's tried to position Italy in this place before. She used exactly the same word, bridge, in terms of trying to sort of be this link between Africa and the European Union before, and now she's trying to do it with the US. You know, Trump has openly said kind words, if you like, towards her. He's called her a strong leader. There's admiration from both sides, I guess, for their styles of leadership. She was very present, as you mentioned, Emma, at the inauguration. But at the same time, she's sort of been sidelined at the moment by France and the UK in Europe. And so she's sort of desperate to eke out a position for Italy. She is ambitious. She does want Italy to have more of a role in the world. And so the next step for her is to try and make a meeting happen at the White House. She's late on that, if you like. Starmer and Macron have already been, but there's apparently something in the offing, perhaps for the end of March or possibly April. She's also floated her own idea for a peace deal. She's maybe suggested that instead of Ukraine joining NATO, it could just have Article 5 extended to it, which of course is that clause within NATO of common defence. Whether that will wash with Trump, of course, because that's essentially like being in NATO without actually being in NATO, remains to be seen, Emma.
What can Meloni do to mitigate risk, given the fact that Trump is notoriously mercurial? He becomes best friends and then he falls out very, very quickly. But also within Europe can enjoy having this connection across the Atlantic. But at the end of the day, Europe is very, very much at pains to act as one and ensure that were the West to divide, which is what Meloni fears, that Europe is entirely united.
I mean, she's being very, very careful at the moment. She's choosing her words carefully. She's trying to be extremely balanced. She's read the political winds and how they've changed. She's been a very staunch defender of Ukraine in the past, and she's still defending Ukraine, but she's choosing her words carefully and trying to be as neutral as possible. And that's something she would take into her meeting in the White House. Beyond trying to, I guess, balance Europe, she also has to balance her own coalition. Don't forget that here in Italy, she has a coalition government, and within that government, you have very different points of view. Salvini is very much, from the Lega party, the vice prime minister. He's very much, almost a Russian apologist. He's very pro-Putin. And then you have her foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, who's very pro having this common European defence, something she's against. So as well as having to try and stitch together the European nations and their different points of view, she also is going to have to try and keep her coalition together when there are different views within it regarding Ukraine and Russia, Emma.
Indeed. What do the Italians make of her? With her
Meloni?
Yes, with her international focus at the moment. Yes, as you described it, the Italian political situation needs to be very delicately managed as well.
It does. I think there's a broad feeling that there's very strong support for Ukraine, largely in Italy and and the European Union more widely, and so their support if she can do something. But she has such a big task on her hands, and the first thing she needs to do is actually get this meeting. She was hoping that she'd have it sooner, but it hasn't happened yet. She said in London on Sunday, I will go at some point, but it's not in the calendar at the moment, trying to play down the fact. But at the end of the day, she hasn't been given that precious meeting by Trump. I guess now really all eyes turn to what Europe will do to respond to this news, this latest news. There's news every day, isn't there, coming out of the White House. The EU has a summit in Brussels on Thursday, and there will be urgent talk of what to do. I mean, there's a need to ramp up defence spending. That's been recognised by Ursula von der Leyen, and so there's going to be numerous ways in which this can be done. There's talk of possibly emitting a joint EU debt, a EU bond, to try and finance armaments. What's certainly clear is that with this big pause in arms going to the Ukraine, the EU just simply doesn't have the capacity right now. It doesn't have the stockpiles of arms. Maybe in the future it can ramp up its defence spending and meet that, but certainly in the short to medium term, it won't be able to do that. So lots of questions that will need answering, lots of ideas that will be floated in Brussels on Thursday after this latest news out of the White House, Emma.
Ed Stocker, thank you so much for joining us on the line. Still to come on today's programme.
The Louvre is trading canvases for couture, celebrating its first ever fashion exhibition with a star-studded soirée.
Is the Louvre's Grand Dîner Paris's answer to the Met Gala? Find out later on The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me is the Europe and Middle East correspondent Ruth Michelson. A very good morning to you, Ruth.
Good morning, Emma.
Let's have a look at this story that is breaking this morning. The fact that Egypt is hosting a meeting to bring Arab leaders together to hopefully come up with an alternative to the plan that Donald Trump has mooted for Gaza.
Yes. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been referring to it as the Witkoff proposal, apparently, claiming that this came from Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. According to the New York Times, the AP, White House yet to confirm that, just saying it supports whatever action Israel takes. What's happening at the moment is that we appear to be in somewhat uncharted waters with the first phase of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas having ended on Sunday. And now Netanyahu has been talking about the so-called Witkoff plan, even though there's no agreement on this second phase of this deal yet to be hammered out. So the Israelis are trying to enforce a new plan that would require Hamas to release half of the remaining hostages in exchange for a ceasefire extension and an agreement to negotiate a lasting truce. But there are very few guarantees that Israel would release more Palestinian prisoners like we saw in the first phase of the deal.
I mean, just looking at the way that the papers are covering it this morning, I mean, the Washington Post is talking about the fact that there are two things here. As you mentioned, we have Donald Trump's Witkoff proposal, and then we have the fact that the Gaza-Hamas ceasefire is in such a perilous state at the moment, and there is this amazing rush by Arab leaders to try to create some calm in both areas.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's also the mention in another piece in the New York Times, quite important, that in order to ramp up pressure on Hamas, as the way this has been reported, that Israel completely halted all the entry of all goods and humanitarian aid into Gaza on Sunday night. And so there's people in Gaza, including a 24-year-old nurse from the northern part of the Strip, quoted in this piece in the New York Times, saying this was a complete shock, and they'd been so excited for shops to reopen and prices to drop. And now, everything's becoming more expensive. And so, that people, in the words of this nurse, are feeling depressed again. They're meant to be celebrating the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, and instead are now focused on this, that there is no food coming in, and the food that is there is now getting increasingly expensive.
Let's move on to an article in Der Spiegel, which talks about this incident in Mannheim in Germany yesterday, when we had a man driving a car into a crowd of people, 2 people being killed, 11 others being injured. And this is at the time when the Chancellor-elect, Friedrich Merz, is trying to pull together a coalition to try to take control of the politics.
Right. So Der Spiegel calling this a black day for Mannheim once again, and asking whether this was a politically motivated attack. The idea that this is a second dark day for Mannheim is in reference to an attack in Mannheim last year, where someone from Afghanistan stabbed people at a far-right demonstration in the same city. So lots of reporting about what happened, given that this is the latest in a string of car ramming attacks, and that now this has happened a week after the election in Germany, while there are negotiations, as you say, about the next coalition. Friedrich Merz, the man most likely to be the next chancellor, saying that, this is an urgent reminder. We must do everything we can to prevent such acts. But we're seeing that there is some sense that this, and also discussions around Ukraine, are amping up this pressure to have a government formed as quickly as possible. Merz has said he wants this to happen by Easter, so in late April. But there's this pressure that, there needs to be some agreement or some coordination between the CDU, the party that got the largest amount of votes in the election, and their former opposition, the SPD, in order to have this special meeting convened by current Chancellor Olaf Scholz on Ukraine policy tomorrow.
Finally, let's have pay tribute to a man who's saved 2 million babies single-handedly.
Yes, this is James Harrison, so-called the man with the golden arm. He has died in Australia aged 88. He has saved the lives of over 2 million babies by donating blood. He is, in the words of CNN, a prolific Australian blood donor, because he was found to that his blood has a so-called rare and precious antibody known as anti-D. And so he had exceptionally high levels of this antibody, which can be given to pregnant women who have something, I believe it's called rhesus disease. And so these blood transfusions, the blood donations that he's given over 1,000 times, are estimated to have saved over 2.4 million babies in Australia. And he was giving blood right up until he reached the legal age limit for giving blood in Australia, which is 81 years old, and said he would have continued to do so had he been given the chance.
Ruth Michelson, thank you so much. You're listening to Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson, and the time here in London is 7:28 a.m. A quick look now at some of the other stories we're keeping an eye on today. The United States has paused military aid to Ukraine. Washington has been the biggest source of aid, both military and financial, since Russia launched a full-scale invasion in 2022. It follows a heated row between Presidents Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office last week, during which President Zelensky was accused of not being thankful enough for America's help. Critics say Ukraine is no longer being treated by Washington as the victim, but as the aggressor. Arab leaders are holding an emergency meeting in Cairo to examine the rebuilding of Gaza. They're trying to come up with an alternative to Donald Trump's plan to clear Gaza of its residents and turn the Strip into a beach resort. The Vatican says Pope Francis has had 2 more breathing attacks yesterday and has been put back on an oxygen mask. He's being treated in hospital for double pneumonia. Japan's biggest forest fire in 3 decades is still burning, with thousands evacuated from the north of the country. The blaze has burned more than 5,000 acres and damaged 80 buildings in Iwate Prefecture. And the launch of Europe's first commercial space shuttle, Ariane 6, has been postponed for a second time because of what's been described as an anomaly on the ground. The launch was meant to put a French military observation satellite into the orbit. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 8:30 a.m. I should say, in Paris now, which is where we head as Fashion Week gets going. In a moment, we'll hear from Monocle's Natalie Theodosi. But first, a spotlight on one of the city's most prestigious locations, the Louvre, which is finally embracing the arts of beautiful clothing combined with fabulous hospitality. Rachel Bouvier's piece is voiced for us by Grace Charlton.
The Louvre will host a soirée tonight to mark the first fashion-focused exhibition in the museum's 231-year history. A day after the start of Paris Fashion Week, Le Grand Dîner du Louvre will celebrate Louvre Couture, a showcase of ensembles and accessories on loan from fashion houses such as Dior and Dries Van Noten, alongside many of the museum's treasured objects that inspired their design. Now, the Louvre has turned to the same fashion houses to help raise funds to go towards initiatives such as the museum's conservation projects and education programs. So far, the dinner has surpassed its target of €1 million, though the amount is just a fraction of what New York's Met Gala generates every year for the Costume Institute. The latter received a record $26 million or 24.8 million euros in donations in 2024. Across Paris, the fashion industry's philanthropy is giving the city a makeover. Chanel helped to restore the Grand Palais, and LVMH CEO Bernard Arnault contributed €200 million to the reconstruction of Notre Dame. The Louvre's embrace of fashion might just be the museum's smartest move yet.
And that was Grace Charlton reading the words of Rachel Bouvier there. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, sign up for our free daily newsletter, the Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. And we stay with Paris Fashion Week, kicking off today. I'm joined now from the French capital by Natalie Theodosi, Monocle's fashion director. A very good morning to you, Natalie.
Good morning, Emma.
It's actually already kicked off already, hasn't it? Just briefly, let's talk about the Grand Dîner du Louvre that's coming up. Is this being positioned as France's answer to the Met Gala, or are the French just doing their own thing?
I think that there is a model. The Met Gala has been so successful, so it makes sense that they would kind of look at that model and try to copy it. What I think is interesting is that the Louvre is finally embracing fashion. They've just opened their first fashion exhibition. And given France's heritage, I think it makes sense. But it will be interesting to see if it will continue and if it will emulate the Met Gala model or surpass it.
Let's look ahead to, or let's have a look at what's happening in Paris at the moment. I mean, what is the mood like as we go into Fashion Week?
I think the mood, the mood is very positive. We've had a few quieter weeks in New York and London. A lot of the talent had dropped off. Even in Milan, which is one of the bigger fashion weeks, there's a lot of brands in transition. It felt like a bit of an in-between season, designers resigning from their positions, a bit of nervous energy. So people, I think, are finally coming to Paris and expecting to see more, see the industry really come together. And there's also a lot of exciting debuts at Dries Van Noten, at Givenchy, at Tom Ford. So I think the energy is a lot more upbeat here, finally.
And that does sort of bring together all the it's the last of the 4 big fashion weeks, isn't it? So, I mean, I know you've talked about this on Monocle on Fashion, which we'll hear in a couple of hours right here on Monocle Radio, and you can get it as a podcast, ladies and gentlemen. But is that question of, the relevance of fashion shows and the fact that when we look at the likes of New York and especially London, things seem to be a bit saggy. So is it Paris's role to pep everyone up?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the brands, for them, it just makes sense. They want to reach as many people and the right people as possible. So they know that if they are in Paris, they will they have better chances, at least, to meet the right buyers, the right editors, because it's guaranteed that they will be in town. So Paris does kind of pep everyone up, and it is the home of the Diors and the Chanels of the world, but it has also become a place for talent spotting, whether you're going around the showrooms to look at collections that are happening kind of adjacent to the runway schedule, but also there's a lot of more support for younger brands. Like in a few hours, I'm going to go see the show of the Belgian designer Marie-Adam Lienert. Last night, Vaquera, who is a protege of Adrian Joffe of Dover Street Market, also showed. So what used to be New York and London used to be the place for talent discovery, I think even that has shifted to Paris.
And we also have the shifting of the buyers moving to Paris as well.
Yes, again, buyers have to pick a city and concentrate on that and on specific markets. So you really see everyone come together here. You've got big Japanese delegations. What I find really interesting and what everyone is talking about is about the American buyers and their continued power. We're speaking about a lot of shifts. There has been, again, handing over of the power, I think. Before it used to be all about the big American department stores. Now, big headlines in the news is that Saks, Neiman Marcus are consolidating. They have to reconsider their relationship with brands, but still there's so much appetite in the American market that there's still a lot more regional buyers, specialist boutique owners that are here, and they're placing some of the biggest orders globally.
You mentioned the constant changeover, what is really a pretty serious case of churn in fashion at the moment. But we have two big anticipated shows coming up this week. We have Tom Ford tomorrow, and we have Givenchy on Friday, and new very, very powerful individuals at the helm, because if we have in Tom Ford, we have Haider Ackermann, and then we have Sarah Burton going to Givenchy, which is being seen as a very special moment.
Absolutely. And I think these two are really beloved designers. And for a while, those jobs at the big houses were given to much younger talent, almost straight out of school. And that didn't work out very well. So I think it's really interesting to now see really real veterans take on these positions and to see what they're going to do with them.
And is there a sense that you need a steady hand at the top of the great names in order to make sure that there is not so much rebranding, that the essential values and the styles of a house and an identity of a house can be established with durability?
Yes, I think before it used to be a lot more about the singular vision of the designer, their inspiration for the season, and less about how does that translate into product, into what the customer needs. Now I think that the brand, the customer needs, just generally the heritage of a house are a lot more important, just also because I think the stakes are much higher, that these businesses have become so huge. There's investors and revenues to report at the end of every quarter. But still, I think that the last few months have proven that, yes, the role of the creative director is changing. The brand is a lot more important than them in some ways, but you still need that leader to steer the ship and to kind of have a vision and lead the design team, because the brands that have shown collections that are just designed by studios, you can feel a little bit of confusion.
Natalie Theodosi in Paris, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Just nudging 8:40 in Barcelona, which is where we head to next. The annual Mobile World Congress is underway in Barcelona. Organisers are hoping to beat the 101,000 attendees who rocked up last year. What was once an event which focused on the splashier side of tech is now becoming a little bit more functional. And who else to tell us more about it than David Phelan, Monocle's technology correspondent, who joins us on the line from Barcelona. Good morning, David. How is Barcelona looking today?
Good morning. It's bright and sunny. It's not super warm, but it's a nice day. It looks in prospect anyway.
We'll have a spring in our step as we head to MWC, and just tell us a little bit more about this shift from the splashier side of tech from at the Mobile World Congress to what could argue be like the embracing of the dad trainer of technology.
Yes, that's certainly right. The splashy side, of course, is the launch of mobile phones, of tablets, of other mobile devices. And that's still here as well. But yes, there's definitely been a move towards more intangible things like AI, all those things that are related to AI. And it turns out everything is. Every new product, every new announcement from every phone maker and indeed from networks is all about artificial intelligence. They talk about very little else. But it doesn't seem to have dampened the excitement of the show. I don't know how many people will come this year, but it certainly feels very, very busy. And it feels like it bounced back faster than some other shows like the big electronic show CES in Las Vegas. And it feels at full strength, certainly.
The trouble with AI is it is almost to the naked eye pretty hard to explain what it does. So there is that there's that translation needed, isn't there? What is happening at MWC to make sure that the unknown of artificial intelligence suddenly becomes something that we can relate to our world?
Well, no, you're completely right. AI means something different every time you say it. It's so amorphous. It's not like 5G that you can pin down to specifications. Everyone understands what that is. But I think that the thing that's really happening is there is a move from, for example, Qualcomm were talking about this, AI, where every time you ask a question to your phone, it's sent up into the cloud, where huge servers go through what you've said and reply with their answer, to on-device AI, AI on the edge, as Qualcomm calls it, where everything will be done, or a lot more at least, will be done on your device instead of being in the cloud, which means it can be faster, and it also has benefits in terms of privacy and security.
And looking at the way that companies like Google are trying to demonstrate what they can do, I mean, they're offering everything. It feels a bit gimmicky and a tiny bit sort of unsettling that they're offering you translations of ice creams, and more worryingly, they will design you a mid-century vase.
Oh, yes. These were, I have to say, very impressive demonstrations by Google. It means that with the mid-century vase, it simply meant that someone could speak to their phone, and while speaking to it, they could let the AI in the phone see through its camera this palpable vase, a physical vase that was in the room, and then ask for advice about what colours you should go for. There were little swatches that you could offer, and it was able to recognise the colours through the camera and had knowledge of mid-century modern vibes, so it was able to recommend the colours that might go well with that kind of feeling, and then even tell you which colours went together. So it was the combination of simple things that a phone can do, use its microphone, use its camera, with AI to create a very effective demonstration. Even when the person doing it interrupted what the Google Gemini AI was saying, suddenly the AI went, oh, as though it recognized that someone else was talking and shut up. So it was a very real definition of how these things are becoming much more natural. Natural language is a big part of AI.
What about the usefulness of it? I mean, it is all well and good to be able to order an ice cream in Greek and for it to come back in English or whatever. But to what palpable benefit does the human race gain from having sort of computer-generated information design you a vase?
Well, I think it's just an indication of how things are slowly getting there. The ice cream demonstration was just showing how fast Google, it was again that did that demo, Google Translate can be on your phone so that it visually changes it instantly. But then it will take it further so that as well as showing you what the word for ice cream is in Greek, it can then recommend good gelato places in Barcelona or wherever, and then you can get much more specific and say, yes, but I need a place that does vegan gelato or whatever, and it will find places within a certain area that are open now and at a certain price point. So as it goes on, providing we get cleverer at knowing we can ask more complex questions, it can come back with better answers.
That sounds much more helpful. Just finally, David, it's sort of a one-word answer if you don't mind, because time is against us. I normally ask you what you're going to steal. What's in David's bag? What are you popping in your carry-on to come back to London with?
I only saw it as it's only a prototype at the moment, but a company called Infinix has done a phone with a solar panel on the back, and we all hate running out of battery charge, so that would be a cool thing to have, providing you've got sunshine.
Brilliant idea. Thank you so much, David Phelan, on the line from a sunny Barcelona. You're listening to The Globalist. Time to talk news from the UAE. Mustafa Alwari is a journalist and writer based there, joining us on the line from Abu Dhabi. Very good morning to you, Mustafa. How's Abu Dhabi looking today?
Good morning, Emma. It's nice and cool today, so I can't complain.
Okay, good to hear it. Let's touch briefly on this emergency meeting that's being held in Cairo to try to examine the rebuilding of Gaza. Just to explain the implications for your patch of the earth at the moment.
It's quite a frustrating period, actually. We had some momentum at the start of the year in terms of hoping that we could find a proper resolution to what's happening in Gaza. And the first phase of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas concluded on the weekend. There was supposed to be a negotiated second phase, but that seems to have stalled. So in the face of that, and also what seems to be strong US support for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, the Arab countries have tried to coalesce and find consensus on what could be an approach from this region to try and find a solution. Because in particular, the holy month of Ramadan has started, and it's coincided with a block on humanitarian supplies getting into Gaza by the Israelis. It's not only symbolically a very, very bad time to do this, but in reality, it's making conditions much worse on the ground. So the urgency of finding a political solution and for Arab nations, the 22 states, to get together and get going with the Palestinians on some option to move forward is become even more critical in the last few days.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's move on to a deal that's involving the UAE and Austria.
So I think this is sort of the other side of the region, if you like, which is how to move forward economically and to work in a post-Paris climate deal world, when we know that oil and gas, the biggest resource, particularly for the UAE and other Gulf countries, is not the future. But how do you transition to that future while still ensuring that you're earning money, you're creating the right products? And Abu Dhabi's national oil company ADNOC, together with a longtime partner, Austria's OMV, have agreed to create a chemicals joint venture. And chemicals is very much, an added value segment of the oil and gas industry. They call it the downstream segment. And this deal is also a recognition that, sort of more simple plastic products, if you like, that come from these chemicals, their time is over. And now you really need to move towards more value-added, less disposable plastics. And so there's consolidation here. Companies are being merged. Companies are being brought into this to create this one company that can move forward in a more sustainable and, I guess, more realistic way going forward while maintaining the economic conditions that they need.
It's taken the best part of 2 years for this to happen, and there've been, problems and sticking points in terms of where's the headquarter going to be, who's going to get how is the shareholding going to split, where is it going to be listed. It begs a bigger question now about where do the sort of the administrative and business centres of power now shift to?
Yeah, it is a very good question, Emma, because the headquarters will be in Austria, which is OMV's base, and there is a little bit of history with this, where in previous deals that ADNOC's done, it's happy for the headquarters to be outside of the region, but very much the natural resources, the feedstock for this, which is essentially the oil and gas we're talking about, in particular the oil, is going to be coming from here, from Abu Dhabi and the UAE. So it's a balance of priorities. It's also about partnership. How do you create a partnership that will work, that will continue to work beyond egos, beyond perceptions, and that will make sure that 10, 15, 20 years from now, that the UAE continues to be a very prosperous place. So I think these things always come into it. Of course, negotiating terms is also about what am I going to get? What is my shareholding going to be? But I think this collaborative partnership approach is something we shouldn't take for granted. We're in it, as we know from the political side, we're in a unipolar world. So I think for Gulf countries, in particular the UAE, trying to take more of a sort of bilateral collaborative approach to their business dealings is probably the wise course at the moment.
Let's finally talk about a little bit of soft power, a little bit of culture. The Sheikh Zayed Book Award has attracted thousands of submissions from around the world.
So the Sheikh Zayed Book Award recognizes literature in Arabic as well as translated literature. It also recognizes children's literature and other categories. The total purse is $2.1 million, and they've listed some very interesting titles. And I think what's really significant here is that this announcement for this year's shortlist has also coincided with the release of the International Booker Prize shortlist, which also included a fantasy novel by a Palestinian author called The Book of Disappearance, imagining a world with no Palestinians. So I feel like there's a real moment for recognizing the richness of literature coming from this part of the world. And again, given from where our conversation started this morning, Emma, about sort of war and conflict, and to be able to at least go through the other aspects of what's happening in this region, business and then literature, really gives a more rounded view of the Gulf and the Middle East in general. So there is optimism here. It's not just a future that is bleak, but one that perhaps has hope for everyone.
Mustafa Al-Rawi, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Abu Dhabi. You're listening to The Globalist. Finally, a look at culture news. Joining me in the studio, Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture. A very good morning to you, Sophie.
Good morning, Emma. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. A pleasure anytime on The Globalist. Let's begin with Jack Vettriano, who has died age what? He was sort of 70. He was 73, wasn't he? And they found him, he died in the south of France. But he was this incredibly divisive figure, wasn't he? Self-taught. Critics hated him. Thought he was just a rather nothing painter. But boy, oh boy, how many walls have got a Vettriano print on them?
Yes, I think the story of Jack Vettriano, as you say, is so interesting. He was just 73 when he passed away. But if you look at his work, for anyone who doesn't know him, you'd assume that he would be, maybe 100 years older than that. His work is old-fashioned in so many different ways. And I think critics kind of hate it because it's pastiche, really. It's not really doing anything new. And, it's also quite sexist. There's a lot of sexy women's legs and men staring at them. And the scenes are kind of from the 1920s, 1930s, even sort of Edwardian. But critics hate him, as you say, but he is completely kind of loved and everywhere in sort of Britain. Even when I was at university, people had Jack Vettriano posters on their wall, and when he had a big retrospective of his work in Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow in 2013, it completely broke records for visitor numbers. And I think he's quite a good example of critics and public having completely different opinions about
Indeed,
someone.
it's astonishing, isn't it? Because, there's a really good article in The Telegraph which sort of explains this, a work which was glamorous but empty and ended up on sort of countless Airbnb coasters. What was it about Vettriano? Because you talked there about the fact that he was sexist, or the pictures were sexist, they were old-fashioned. And does it say that art is full of snobs, or whether we as a general public are pretty empty and cultureless?
Well, that's kind of the big question. I think it looks very sort of familiar, and it's very easy to kind of understand and get, but it is very sort of flat, all in all. And
did you ever have a Vettriano coaster or placemat?
I didn't, unfortunately, but people did have them when I was at university, and you see them in hotels or something like that. And I also think there's a lot of respect to, he's had an amazing career, and as you say, he was completely self-taught. He left school at 15. He kept being refused from the Royal Academy summer exhibitions, and then would sell those works for hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I think you have to respect that journey.
That's it, Royal Academy. That was a missed trick. Look, let's go to the absolute opposite end of art now. Let's go to Art Basel and a new award for visionaries.
Yes, this one is maybe a little bit hard to understand at first glance because it's quite complicated. I think they're trying to do something very ambitious, but I'm interested to see where they go with this. But this is Art Basel's first awards that they've ever kind of given out, which I think is quite interesting. It's quite a big moment. They're giving out 36 medals. Half of those will go to artists. But the other half, I think, are the ones that I'm slightly more interested in. They're for curators, but also patrons, people in the media, and also just other people working on behalf of artists behind the scenes. And I think with this, what they're trying to, show is that art is a huge community effort. It's not about the kind of single genius artist. And so hopefully they'll do something here which is kind of showing and appreciating that sort of collective artistic work.
Finally, you and Robert Bound are on a plane later. Off to Spain. Why are you going to Spain, Sophie?
Well, firstly, I have to say it's very rainy in Spain this week, whereas we actually have lovely sunshine here. But we are going to Arco Madrid, which is Spain's biggest contemporary art fair. Spain isn't known for its contemporary art fairs, so it's not, massive on the scale kind of globally. But it's really interesting because it was founded just after the end of the Franco regime, so it's sort of tracked at the same time as Spain's return to democracy. Spain is really interesting. The economic recovery there at the moment has been amazing. The Economist said it was the best performing economy in the world last year. So there's lots of kind of a positive sense around Spain at the moment. Obviously, there's lots of links with Latin America, and I think it's a very well curated fair. They do things like bringing in school children to go on trips there and things like that. So I think it's really kind of nicely tied in with the wider city.
And we have just a few bare seconds to talk about this, but what are you most excited about seeing?
Well, inside the fair, there is a thematic section called Amazofuturism, which looks at how we perceive the Amazon and its kind of cultural significance. It's giving a lot of weight to indigenous voices and knowledge, and I think that will be a really interesting one to look out for.
Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, thank you very much indeed for joining us in the studio. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Vincent McAvenny, Laura Kramer and Monica Lillis. Our researcher was Francesca Gilt and our studio manager was Steph Chungu. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.